All right, we'll just give it a few more minutes, just to let everybody who shows up right on 8:30 to be able to get in here.
Yeah, Zach, if you would, at some point when I'm doing the introduction, I'd love to be able to share my screen.
Okay, Patsy can make him. You can make him a co-host, and then you'll be able to.
Okay.
Bob, how do you do that? Share your screen, or what does that do?
It lets me project what I'm seeing to you guys. So instead of, for example, you won't see the system evaluation QR codes or session evaluations. You'll see what I put up. So I can put up some not so embarrassing things regarding Dr. Nguyen.
Now, does everybody share their screen, or?
No, it's limited because you have to be careful about some people. You don't want them to share their screens.
What does that do exactly? I'm not quite sure. When you share your screen.
Well, I also have more than one screen, so I could share a number of different screens just to be really confused.
Now, I noticed that some individuals are not actually in their pictures. They have like pictures. How do they do that, or why do they do that?
They don't want to be. They maybe aren't. They don't have their makeup on this morning. They're in their pajamas still.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, we will get started. We'd like to welcome you to the Emory Dermatology Grand Rounds. It's so nice to see, as was just being discussed, some of your faces that have your makeup on. So we appreciate your effort. And if you don't, that's fine as well. But we just appreciate you being here and grateful for all your support of Emory Dermatology, whether you're faculty or resident or one of the many visitors that we have. We hope that you'll return as well at some point in the future to another Grand Rounds. We're excited for what we have on the docket today. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you are not presenting, if you wouldn't mind keeping your microphone muted. And I will try my best to keep an eye on everybody's microphone. If you find that you've been muted, it's nothing personal, just to keep everyone from interrupting our speaker. If you wouldn't mind signing in with these QR codes for those who need CME credit. Even though I know you registered to get into the meeting, it's still important to still register using these QR codes. What we'll do today, as most of our ground round speakers, we will have our questions saved until the end. If you would like to submit a question to be discussed at the end, you can go into the chat function and write it down. You can either send it to me, which would be preferable, or to everyone, and then we will have kind of a record of those, and we can discuss those at the end in case you forget your question or just want to get it out there. So we will save all questions and answers until the end of Dr. Nguyen's presentation. And with that, I will turn the time over to Dr. Swirlick to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Zach. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Harrison Nguyen, one of our own, who's going to talk to us on drug pricing. But first, I'd like to do a brief introduction. I have, with Dr. Chen's imminent departure to Duke, I've assumed the role of being the primary mentor of Dr. Nguyen, and it's really an honor and a privilege. I've gotten to know him much better over the past, actually, few weeks to few months. And this opportunity to introduce him allowed me to sort of take a deeper dive into his CV and his background. And so let's see, I'll share this one. So I did a little bit of internet stalking. And Dr. Nguyen he says he's originally from Detroit. He went to high school in Detroit and graduated as valedictorian of his high school class. But little did I know, and this is his bio page from the Rice University football team that he played Division I football as a walk-on. Never played football in high school. This is his bio as a junior in 2010. A couple things I want to point out is, number one, he played linebacker at a weight of 185 pounds. Now, I'm really impressed. I weigh close to 185 pounds. I wouldn't last 10 seconds in Division I football. But it turns out he didn't play football in high school. He played actually golf, and I didn't realize that. So a very talented young man. So he was born in Buffalo, New York. And I didn't realize that because I was also born in Buffalo, New York. So we've got lots of things in common. I'll stop sharing. So the other aspects, Dr. Nguyen went to Rice University for undergraduate school, was a scholar there, and then went to Baylor for medical school. He has had additional training at Yale. He was a advisor for a year to the FDA. He is a prolific author. Even at this point, he has a CV that would be sort of on par with individuals who are associate professor level with a H-index that's impressive. And on top of that, and I'm not going to embarrass him with this, we share one other interest, and that's ballroom dance. He's a semi-professional salsa dancer, even spent time in Colombia, sort of touring down there and dancing. So this is an individual who is incredibly impressive in terms of accomplishments, amazing amount of energy. He wrote to me in his brief bio, he's traveled to 36 countries already. I'm not sure I've traveled to 36 states, but I suspect that his ambition over his lifetime will include not only other countries, but other planets. So he's that sort of ambitious guy. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Nguyen as our Grand Round speaker today.
Thank you so much for the kind words and introduction, Dr. Swirlick. Good morning, Emory Dermatology. Please allow me a moment to share my screen. It's an honor for me to be presenting Grand Rounds today on a topic of deep personal interest. It first started about 5 years ago. I was a first-year student in a health economics class, and my professor after class said, "Harrison, have you seen the headlines from today's news?" And I was thinking to myself, yeah, I've seen the headlines on ESPN. Are you talking about Tom Brady and Deflategate? What are you talking about? Well, it turns out he was talking about the headlines regarding dermatology drug prices rising rapidly. He pulled me into his office and showed me headlines from the Wall Street Journal. And since then, it's been an area that I've spent a lot of time studying and thinking about. And it seems like the more I study it, the more confused I get. And so I think it is testament to the complex nature and challenging topic that it represents in the US. And so my goal today, hopefully, is to shed light on some of the factors that contribute to its complexity and the challenge that it represents in the United States. I have no commercial interest or commercial disclosure or conflicts of interest to disclose for this presentation. During this presentation, I hope to explore 3 fundamental questions. First, why is drug pricing a problem in the US? Second, how are drug prices determined? And third, what solutions have been proposed to improve drug pricing? In reviewing this presentation with Dr. Blaylock reminded me of the importance of defining concepts up front to unify our discussion. There are many definitions of what a drug price refers to, and furthermore, there are many types of drug prices. To simplify today's discussion, I will try to focus on drug prices being the cost to the payer, which ultimately is transferred to the patient and society through other mechanisms. Furthermore, I will attempt to focus on the economics of drug pricing, and we'll try to stay away from a discussion on ethics. I'll leave that one to Dr. Stoff. Let's start with question 1. Why is drug pricing a problem in the US? The United States has long spent more on prescription medications than other countries. In 2014, per capita spending on prescription drugs was north of $1,000, compared with an average of $688 for 6 other industrialized nations. Prescription medications now comprise a total of 17% of healthcare costs, and prescription medication coverage constitutes 19% of employer-based insurance benefits. Simply put, drug prices in the US are high. Even for the same exact medications, the US spends a significant amount more than other countries. On average, citizens of other wealthy countries spend only 56% of what Americans spend on the exact same drug. Canadian prices are about 28% of the price in the United States. We pay more for the same thing. The absolute cost is not the only problem that concerns patients, prescribers, payers, and policymakers. It is also the rate of increase of prescription drug costs. Between 2013 and 2015, net spending on prescription drugs increased approximately 20% in the United States, far outpacing the rate of general inflation. So costs are not just higher, they're also rising more quickly. This issue is particularly relevant for the treatment of skin diseases, where retail prices of select brand name dermatologic medications increased an average of 401% between 2009 and 2015. The increase in commonly prescribed dermatologic medications far outpaced the rate of inflation, national healthcare growth, and physician service reimbursements. This rate of increase was so alarming that dermatology made national headlines, as I referenced in the beginning. Although increases in total drug spending are frequently attributed to the introduction and market uptake of brand name drugs, about 97% of drugs prescribed by dermatologists are generic, and recent increases in costs within dermatology have been driven by higher costs per unit. In addition to their contribution to healthcare spending, increased drug costs have important clinical implications. Increases can reduce the affordability of prescribed regimens and thus patient adherence. It is estimated that between 20 and 30% of Americans don't take their prescribed medications because of high drug prices. So to summarize an answer to our first question of why drug pricing is a problem in the US, drug costs are higher than comparable nations and are growing at a rate faster than any other sector or country. A growing number of Americans cannot afford their medications and results in medication non-adherence. This issue is particularly relevant for the treatment of skin diseases. Moving on to question number 2. How are drug prices determined? A drug's life begins when it is produced by a drug manufacturer and culminates when the medication is prescribed by a provider to the patient. However, for that medication to get from the manufacturer to the patient, there are several stakeholders in the middle that influence whether the patient can receive the prescribed medication and at what cost. Say hello to the pharmaceutical industry middlemen. I'll touch upon these middlemen later in this presentation. Let's first talk about drug manufacturers, also known as the pharmaceutical companies. Drug manufacturers set an initial drug price, also known as the wholesale acquisition cost or the list price. Brand name medications account for 72% of drug spending, but only 10% of all dispensed prescriptions in the US. Brand name medications like Otezla and Dupixent are introduced under exclusivity and or patents, which confer the drug manufacturer a time-limited monopoly, during which time they can set a price that cannot be undercut by competitors with the same drug. Patents protect specific components of a drug, such as formulas, delivery systems, or packaging. They are granted by the Patent and Trademark Office for 20 years from the date of filing and can be bestowed before, during, or after drug approval. Exclusivity, on the other hand, grants rights for the drug itself and is conferred by the FDA upon drug approval, and its duration varies based on the drug categorization. Standard brand name drugs receive about 3 to 5 years of exclusivity depending on the novelty, and biologic drugs synthesized from living organisms receive about 12 years of exclusivity. Orphan drugs, which target rare diseases, receive exclusivity of 7 years. Dermatologic examples of orphan drugs have included rituximab for the treatment of pemphigus vulgaris and adalimumab for the treatment of moderate to severe hidradenitis suppurativa. Although regulatory exclusivities often set a lower bound duration for market exclusivity, the actual length of the monopoly is most commonly dictated by patent time. The median length of post-approval market exclusivity is 12 years for widely used drugs and 14.5 years for highly innovative first-in-class drugs. The pharmaceutical industry has maintained that high drug prices reflect the research and development costs that the company incurred to develop the drug and are necessary to pay for future research costs to develop new drugs. However, a couple factors weigh against these rationales. First, important innovation that leads to new drug products is often performed in academic institutions, like in the case of Dr. Arbizer's lab, and are supported by investment from public sources such as the NIH. Second, the proportion of revenue of large pharmaceutical companies that is invested in the research and development is just 10 to 20%. There's little evidence of any association between research development and drug prices. Rather, prescription drugs are priced in the United States primarily on the basis of what the market will bear. Please allow me to repeat the statement. Prescription drugs are priced in the US primarily on the basis of what the market will bear. Competition is the main mechanism for lowering drug prices, and the only form of competition that consistently and substantially decreases prescription drug prices occurs with availability of generic drugs, which emerge after the monopoly period ends. Here's one example of exclusivity and competition on drug pricing. Many of you are familiar with Eldara, which was first introduced to the US market by 3M in 1997 after receiving approval for the treatment of external genital and perianal warts. Although topical 5-FU was being prescribed off-label for the treatment of warts, it was not FDA approved, and the irritation caused by earlier formulations was restrictive. Eldara represented the first in-class topical treatment that could be self-applied by the patient, had good efficacy with low recurrence rates, and a favorable safety profile. As such, Eldara was initially priced at over $100 per month for the cream. That was in $1997, which equates to about $162 in today's dollars. In 2010, the exclusivity period for Eldara ended, and generic imiquimod cream was introduced by multiple generic manufacturers. This resulted in the price of imiquimod cream dropping significantly to about 1/5 the price. Without insurance, the out-of-pocket cost for a 1-month supply currently of imiquimod is about $20. Now contrast this with a different story, the story of Humira. Humira was developed by the pharmaceutical company AbbVie and was approved by the FDA in 2002, at which time Humira only boasted 1 patent for the TNF-alpha blocking protein. Over the next decade and a half, the company increased that number to more than 100 patents covering several indications and processes. This network of patents, which includes patents on liquid formulations, dosing, administration, others, has effectively shielded Humira from biosimilar competition in the US. And even 18 years after its introduction, Humira currently remains on patent protection and a 1-month supply without insurance costs over $5,000. AbbVie has been able to persuade markers of biosimilar competitors, including Amgen, Samsung, Mylan, Novartis, Pfizer, Momenta, to settle for a 2023 launch rather than engaging in a legal battle to invalidate the patents. This is representative of pharmaceutical business strategy called product lifecycle management, or evergreening, which involves preventing generic competition through legal maneuvers and allowing companies to maintain high prices only guided by what the market will bear. Now, even with the introduction of generics, generic price increases can still occur in the setting of reduced competition, where only a limited number of generic manufacturers produce a drug. One study found a negative association between the change in drug price and the median number of manufacturers of generic topical dermatologic medications. Therefore, true market competition must exist to support a functioning generic market. So to summarize the first part of answer to question 2, initial drug prices are set by the drug manufacturer. The most important factor that allows manufacturers to set drug prices is market exclusivity, protected by monopoly rights awarded upon FDA approval and by patents. The availability of generic drugs produced by multiple manufacturers after this exclusivity period is the main means of reducing prices, but access to them may be delayed by numerous business and legal strategies. Now, I know this is a dense topic, so let's take a quick brain break. As many of you know, I'm Vietnamese. Parents are 2 Vietnamese refugee immigrants, and Vietnamese was actually my first language. Did you know Vietnamese is a tonal language with 6 tones? And so, for example, the words ma, 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 and ma are all different words with different meanings. I've been told that Vietnamese is one of the most challenging languages for non-English or for native English speakers to learn, and I imagine it has a lot to do with tones. Another interesting thing is that the áo dài is the Vietnamese national garment that is worn by both sexes. It's a common garment to be worn at big events, weddings, and as a child, I had to wear it to several important events, and I remember feeling so embarrassed to put it on. I can imagine in this photo, I was probably kicking and screaming to put it on to take this photo. All right, so let's get back to our drug supply chain. While drug manufacturers set the initial price and certainly play a role in high drug prices, there are multiple stakeholders in the middle of the drug supply chain that also influence the price of a drug. The first middleman is the drug distributor. Distributors buy drugs from a manufacturer and then sell smaller volumes to pharmacies and providers. Some of the largest U.S. distributors include McKesson, AmerisourceBergen, and Cardinal Health. Distributors usually supply inventory, physically deliver the products to locations around the country, and share the risk, cost, and logistical responsibilities of product and delivery with the manufacturer, including the return of unused medications. Wholesalers are compensated primarily based on the list price of the drug, and thus are incentivized to support high list prices. Next, the drug arrives at the pharmacy. There, the pharmacy sets a price for these medications that are considerably or even astronomically higher than the original price. This is the cash retail price, or what is sometimes called the usual and customary cost of the medication. This price may be neither usual nor customary, and it's not the price the pharmacy expects to recoup on sales. Speaking of pharmacies, you may have heard the big news earlier this week that Amazon launched its pharmacy service, meaning it's now selling prescription medications in the US. It represents Amazon's latest push into healthcare and a greater trend in the industry of many large players who have made their name outside of this healthcare sector, such as JP Morgan and Berkshire Hathaway, who are attempting to enter the healthcare space to create industry disruption and competition. We'll have to stay tuned to see how they do. Now, getting back to the supply chain, most patients do not pay the retail price of the medication at the pharmacy and rely instead on their insurance company and or their employer to cover the majority of the medication costs. Whether the insurance will cover the medication depends on how the formulary or an insurance's preferred drug tier is designed. Insurance companies pay pharmacy benefit managers to design and manage their formularies. Who are pharmacy benefit managers and what do they do? Pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, are companies that manage prescription drug benefits on behalf of health insurers. By negotiating with drug manufacturers and pharmacies to theoretically lower medication prices, PBMs have a significant behind-the-scenes impact in determining total drug costs for insurers, shaping patient access to medications, and determining how much pharmacies are paid. PBMs have become a major part of the pharmaceutical supply chain and are highly profitable. To fully understand the function of the pharmacy benefit manager, we must define a concept called a rebate, which are a major key to understanding drug price increases. Rebates are payments by drug manufacturers to PBMs that are used to incentivize the use of the pharmaceutical company's drugs. In many cases, rebates have been used to determine which drugs are included in a formulary and on which tier a drug is prioritized. It's like giving money under the table to the coach to get your son in the starting lineup. The average rebate is estimated to be 20% off the list price, but may reach upwards of 60%. In competitive drug markets, there are many drug options to choose from, and therefore rebates can be sizable because PBMs and insurers can elect to cover some products and not others. As such, the presence of multiple manufacturers with head-to-head competitors are associated with higher rebates. Here's a schematic that illustrates the role of PBMs and rebates. Individuals pay premiums to their employer and or insurer. The insurance company, in turn, pays the PBM to manage drug costs. The PBM negotiates with the pharmacy over reimbursement for drugs and with the drug manufacturer to obtain rebates in exchange for the preferred placement on the insurance formulary. Rebate details are usually only partially disclosed to insurers and to patients. Therefore, rebates, which are often instrumental drivers in drug tiering, drug pricing, and preferred formulary selection, carry a substantial lack of transparency, and these drug rebates drive PBM revenue. The retrospective nature of rebates prevents final drug prices from being accessible at the time of distribution or even when a drug is added to a formulary. Formulary design is therefore not necessarily based on clinical data or cost effectiveness. Once again, please allow me to repeat that. Formulary design is therefore not necessarily based on clinical data or cost effectiveness. Rather, PBMs and insurers may design their tier formulations based on the rebates a drug manufacturer awards, which may lead to quote-unquote auctioning of formulary access. In extreme cases, a costly drug may be in a preferential tier when cheaper, safer, or more effective generic alternatives are available. Rebate reliance may also reduce the value proposition for cheaper drugs manufactured by smaller companies, which are less attractive to both PBMs, who would receive reduced rebates, and wholesalers who would receive proportionally smaller fees because of lower volumes. Now, PBMs may pass a part of this rebate to insurer in the form of a discount, which in turn may theoretically result in the reduction of premium costs. But in reality, much of this rebate is retained by PBMs as profit, also known as the retained rebate. Maximization of the retained rebate reduces neither insurance premiums nor copays. In some situations, patients with high deductible plans may pay the full list price for a drug, allowing the PBM and secondarily the insurer to keep any pre-negotiated rebates. And in some cases, the PBM insurer may pocket 50% of the price paid by the patient. The percentage-based rebate system incentivizes PBMs to favor a higher list price, and therefore PBMs often grant formulary status to higher priced drugs where the percentage rebate and thus PBM profit is greater. In some cases, this baseline drug price is cheaper than the drug price with insurance and patient copays, and it would be cheaper to buy the drug outright with cash instead of using insurance. However, if the patient still uses insurance in this scenario, the insurance may retain the difference known as a clawback. So here's an example of a clawback. The customer is prescribed 40 milligrams of the medication pantoprazole, and the PBM has helped negotiate a $15 copay for the generic pantoprazole. At the pharmacy, it costs the pharmacy $2.05. The pharmacy is reimbursed $7.22, giving a profit of $5.17. The pharmacy benefit manager, quote unquote, claws back the remaining $7.78 from this pharmacy. Before 2018, insurance companies could use gag clauses to prevent pharmacists from informing customers if a drug would be cheaper to buy without insurance. These gag clauses are now being outlawed. What about providers? Unfortunately, clinicians have also been implicated in raising drug prices. For instance, in Medicare Part B, which uses a buy and bill model for reimbursement, i.e. the clinician purchases the IV infusion, such as in the case with IV Rituxan or IV infliximab first, and then bills for it after it is administered in the clinic. Clinicians can profit from the spread between their purchase costs and the Medicare reimbursement. While we all know the Dr. Feldmans of the world are not doing this, unfortunately, not every provider has a moral compass or gardening skills of Ron Feldman. Providers, including dermatologists, can reduce some medication costs by using their use of generic and biosimilar drugs that have proven safety and efficacy. However, generic medications are no longer universally cheaper than their branded equivalents. While it still usually applies to large drug markets with multiple generics, the dysfunction and price spikes in the smaller generic markets means that on any given day, a branded medicine in these areas may be cheaper than a generic. However, because of the lack of transparency at the point of care, physicians rarely know which is the cheapest option. The current system is so complex that it is impossible for the same patient with the same insurance, with the same pharmacy chain in the same city on the same day and for the same generic drug to pay different copays in different branches. This makes prediction of copays nearly impossible. This complexity and unpredictability forms the basis of the first part of the title of my presentation, Holy Grail. While the Holy Grail is widely known for the treasure in King Arthur literature, I use it in reference to a 2014 song by Jay-Z and Justin Timberlake. In their song, Justin Timberlake presumably describes the behavior of his lover. All right, here it goes. This is going to sound exactly like Justin Timberlake. And baby, it's amazing I'm in this maze with you. And you got Jay-Z in the back going, oh yeah, I just can't crack your code. One day you screaming you love me loud. The next day you're so cold. One day you're here, one day you're there, one day you care. You're so unfair. Sipping from your cup till runneth over. Holy Grail. And as I listen to these lyrics, by the way, I'll be auditioning for American Idol next week. As I listened to these lyrics a few weeks ago while on the treadmill, it reminded me of the erratic and at times selfish behavior of the drug pricing supply chain. To complete the answer to question 2, overall, drug prices in the US are driven by a complex web of interconnected relationships, incentives, and payments among a multiplicity of stakeholders in the drug supply chain. The lack of transparency is a major barrier to physicians functioning as effective stewards of resources and result in increased overall costs. So let's move on to our final question. Question 3. What solutions have been proposed to improve the problem of drug pricing? Several changes have been proposed and are in various stages of development. I think that the proposals with the most serious momentum can be divided into 3 buckets: improving competition, increasing transparency, and price controls. The first change, the one with perhaps the most traction in Congress, is allowing the federal government to negotiate the price of prescription drugs on behalf of people enrolled in Medicare Part D drug plans. Medicare Part D is provided through a marketplace of private plans that compete for business. And currently, the government does not have the authority to negotiate drug prices for Medicare beneficiaries. Therefore, the bargaining power of Medicare beneficiaries is relatively fragmented, and proponents of changing this law believe that giving the government the authority to negotiate drug prices would provide the leverage to lower drug costs, particularly for highly priced drugs for which there are no competitors. There are currently a variety of bills in Congress that are aimed at making this change. These bills seek to achieve the same overall goal of reducing drug prices in Medicare Part D by allowing the government to negotiate prices with drug manufacturers, but they take different approaches on how to achieve that end. Overall, there is strong and bipartisan public support for this change. Second, recall the graph that was shown at the beginning of the hour that illustrated that the same medications cost more in the US than elsewhere. This is the basis for the second change, which would allow for the safe importation of prescription drugs from Canada and other countries. Current law allows only for the importation of certain drugs under defined limited circumstances, and only if the HHS secretary certifies that importation poses no threat to the health and safety of the American public. In December 2019, the Trump administration outlined 2 pathways for the expansion of the importation of prescription drugs, which relied on programs implemented and managed at the state level. Several states, including Florida, Vermont, Colorado, and Maine, have already taken action to become the first states to implement importation plans. While it is unclear how the Biden administration will affect these changes, President-elect Joe Biden has consistently voiced his support for the continued expansion of drug importation. The third point under which multiple proposals could be classified is increasing access to cost-effective generics. Recall the prior point that the mere presence of a generic option does not necessarily equate to lower drug prices. Consider the case of topical steroids, in which there exist multiple generic options, yet there continue to be many cost barriers to access. Just ask our first-year residents at Grady, who take the lead on prior authorizations for generic topical steroids that at times seem like a guessing game, which one the patient will be able to obtain. One possible mechanism for combating this is implementation of the automatic same-class substitution mechanism. For example, instead of prescribing clobetasol ointment or augmented betamethasone ointment, the provider could prescribe a quote-unquote class 1 ointment, and then the pharmacist could go, boop, prescribe the ointment with the most cost efficacy for the patient. One analysis estimated that if prescribers had written for the cheapest topical steroid within a given potency class, an estimated 448 million could have been saved in 2015 alone. Increasing access to cost-effective generics would also be enhanced if anti-competitive tactics from some brand name pharmaceutical companies, such as those discussed in reference to Humira earlier, were diminished. To this end, the CREATES Act of 2019, which was introduced and sponsored by 29 senators from both parties, aims to crack down on anti-competitive practices by first allowing generic and biosimilar companies to obtain samples of branded products in order to expedite their testing and equivalency, and second, expediting FDA safety evaluation of generic medications. The fourth change would be to transform the nature of drug rebates. In 2019, the HHS Secretary Alex Azar announced intended changes to the rebate system. Under HHS's proposed changes, manufacturers paying rebates directly to PBMs would violate federal criminal statutes. Instead, manufacturers would be permitted to negotiate upfront discounts with PBMs and plans, and those discounts would then have to be applied to the point of sale to lower prices for those individuals who take the prescribed drugs, i.e. the patients. These ideas were arguably the most sweeping changes advanced by the Trump administration to reduce drug costs, and they have generated the most intense public reaction. In general, the pharmaceutical companies have broadly supported these changes in line with a public campaign to highlight the proportion of overall drug prices that are driven by the middlemen, such as the pharmacy benefit managers and wholesalers, instead of their own direct activities. Now, the final two changes I will talk about today have to do with price controls and would represent unprecedented governmental intervention in a previously free market space. The first intervention is to limit the launch prices of drugs with no competition. That is, first-in-class drugs with exclusivity or protection by patents. One measure that has been proposed to do this, which is part of President-elect Joe Biden's healthcare plan, is called external reference pricing. External reference pricing is the practice of using drug prices in foreign countries to help set domestic prices. It is already being used by other industrialized nations, and if implemented in the US, can inform the US government and payers about international prices, would allow for greater price transparency, and could suggest which specific drugs are outliers in the US compared to international drugs. One study estimated the savings to Medicare Part D by using external reference pricing would have been $72.9 billion in 2018. It has been debated how this would be best implemented in the US because the US is often the first country where drug companies sell new medications, so there may not be any external reference pricing available for a new drug. Therefore, it may be best implemented shortly after establishment of new drugs, perhaps in conjunction with the next measure of limiting annual price increases to inflation. As was mentioned before, drug prices are rising at a rate of at least 3 times the rate of inflation. And in the study of dermatologic medications, many-fold that number. One intervention to ameliorate the rapidly rising nature is to compare price changes to the rate of inflation, either general inflation or perhaps more conservatively, healthcare price inflation. The Prescription Drug Pricing Reduction Act, which was introduced into the Senate in 2019 through a bipartisan effort, would require drug manufacturers to issue rebates to CMS for drugs covered under Medicare, in which the drug price increases faster than inflation. As of July 2020, the Prescription Drug Pricing Act has been read twice on the Senate floor and is now under review by the Committee on Finance. So to summarize an answer to our third question, there is no silver bullet for fixing drug pricing. Interventions aimed at increasing competition, enhancing transparency of the rebate system, and controlling prices have been introduced and are at various stages of development. Fixing the problem of drug pricing is a bipartisan priority. In conclusion, in the US, drugs cost more than comparable countries and are rising at an alarming rate. This is particularly true in dermatology. The most important factor that allows manufacturers to set high initial drug prices is market exclusivity protected by monopoly rights awarded upon FDA approval and by patents. High drug prices are further driven by a complex web of interconnected relationships and payments among stakeholders in the drug supply chain. The lack of transparency results in increased overall costs and creates a major barrier to physicians being effective stewards of resources and considering end costs of the patient in their clinical decision-making. Dermatologists should keep abreast of the evolving nature of drug pricing, advocate for effective policy, and help patients by minimizing drug costs through careful prescribing. There are so many people I have to thank. When I think back a couple years ago, when I was interviewing for residency, one of the reasons I really wanted to come to Emory was the clear and powerful presence of mentorship that's so integral to our department. And I've put some photos of just some of the mentors that I've had the privilege of learning from each and every day. But there are so many more that I wish to thank. It's truly an honor to learn from you. It's an honor to work alongside the residents in this program, and I'd like to really thank all of Emory Dermatology. There's two further people that I would like to thank. Two further people that I was, when I first started residency and learned that residents would be giving grand rounds, I was hoping that the department would be able to meet. They're two of the most important people in my life. And you may, if you saw the participant list, they have tuned in from today. But, you know, I haven't seen my parents in over a year, or almost a year, since COVID has started. But it's with their support and guidance that I am who I am today and who I hope to be in the future. So thank you, Bama, and I love you so much. Thank you to all for your attention, and I welcome your questions and comments.
I am just delighted by your presentation, Harrison. If I'd be honest, I guess it just makes me more cynical than previously, but I think it's true. I think if we look at healthcare costs today, it is outrageous. I think there's so much that we can do as physicians that we don't do. We simply are part of the cog in the wheel, and I think that's very unfortunate. But I think your presentation today was honest, was transparent, and I won't be surprised that it is not much that people will say about it, because either you're part of the solution or you're part of the problem.
Thanks for that comment, Dr. Elam. I totally agree. I think this the nature of drug pricing. I hope I was able to convey it. There's problems being added from multiple sources, and I pondered starting the introduction off with a quote from one of my favorite characters, Michael Scott, where he talks about the 5 stages of grief. Anger, 5 stages of anger, acceptance, denial, depression, then acceptance. And he says, I hope to get everyone to acceptance or understanding, but if I can't get them to acceptance, at least depression. If I can get you depressed, then that's my job. And so that's how I felt when putting this presentation together, that I think if I did my job today, I hope that I was able to convey just the gravity of drug pricing, the challenge, and in some way, the complexity that it represents for being able to resolve it.
So I want to thank you for an elegant talk. I think this is really important, and I think it should be given on a larger scale. So I have now some experience in drug development, and I can share some insights. So first of all, some exclusivity is needed, or else nobody's going to develop the drug. Because it's kind of like if you're asking people to take risk without the possibility of reward, and that's not going to happen. The second thing is the unique role of the United States in drug approval. So basically, the United States is the gold standard of drug approval in the fact that other countries will accept FDA data and in terms of acceptance, but the United States will not accept other countries. And that makes the cost of development of a drug much more expensive in the United States than it is elsewhere. And so people are going to try to recoup their costs. Now, I'm co-founder of a company that's developing a topical proteasome inhibitor for rosacea. We've gone through a phase 2A trial. And one of the pitches that I make is that this drug can be produced inexpensively because the API, the active ingredient, is very inexpensive. And so far, the costs that our company has expended in getting to 2A have been relatively modest. We've raised $3 million so far. And that's very low for getting into humans. And some of the responses that I've gotten is, well, the physicians, Pbms will never let you get a cheap drug to market. And I've always said that if you can get a cheap drug and sell by volume, you can make a lot of money. But people favor something that's like $1,000 a tube. And I remind themselves that I have never prescribed Regranix or Valclor, which are topicals that are in that range. And I always say $1,000 a tube times 0 is 0. But the kind of thing that I'm seeing in the market now is, let's find an orphan indication that we can prescribe a new drug with modest efficacy and charge up the wazoo. And I think that's a flawed model. But that seems to be predominating in the market today. And so in developing a drug that I think is inexpensive, efficacious, and safe, people always say you can only take 2 out of the 3. I think it's possible to do all 3 out of the 3. That's kind of my vision for the future. And I think that the PBMs in general, so I really liked how you shared about the rebates. I think that PBMs in general should be outlawed because of antitrust, because it's clearly collusive behavior. And they do keep cheaper alternatives, and they do hinder, and it seems like the rebates seem like a form of bribery. And I do think that PBMs, they're not innovative, they don't deliver value, and I think they can be replaced. And I think there's now have a parasitic effect on the market. And so I look forward to their demise. And those are just some of the thoughts that I've had in the past few years of drug development.
I think Harrison, thank you for a great presentation. It's even better the second time I heard it, I suppose when you first presented it. I think Jeff Bezos and Amazon's foray into the drug market adds an additional piece to this, because he intentionally is moving toward a non-insurance model. And as I said to you, that medical relationships and romantic relationships are similar, that triangles are bad. And what Jeff Bezos is moving to do is basically having a relationship between a buyer and a seller without the insurance model inserted. At least my intention, my impression is that it's the third-party payer that facilitates this complexity. And by eliminating the third-party payer in as many of the transactions as possible is what will simplify this into really a more market situation, as opposed to this very complex insurance contaminated, influenced situation. And there's this well understood phenomena with whenever insurance is inserted into financial transactions, it creates what are called moral hazards. And this is like one giant moral hazard.
Dr. Nguyen, thank you for that wonderful presentation. I think a first probably in our history of having somebody sing and or quote Jay-Z and JT together. So, but you're a trailblazer, so we appreciate that about you. But excellent talk overall. I know this question could be probably a whole grand rounds in itself, but how do GoodRx and the other coupon programs play into this, good, bad, or otherwise?
Thank you, Dr. Malkfresh, and thank you, Dr. Arbizner, for your comments. GoodRx is a very interesting organization, and the way that they work is they have relationships with Pbms, who, when the Pbms negotiate with pharmacies, they also provide a negotiation for what would happen if a patient provides a GoodRx coupon at the time of receiving a medication. And so they can't use insurance when they use a GoodRx card, but in some cases it's cheaper than what they were to pay if they were to use their insurance. And so GoodRx aggregates it creates a marketplace for patients to be able to see the price under one screen, and it allows them to then shop for the cheapest price. And so GoodRx makes money by advertising and by a percentage of whenever time their coupon is presented, and then the pharmacies win because there's a lot of times a drug is dispensed under insurance and a patient doesn't fill it due to the high copay, and so they found that with GoodRx, patients are more likely to receive the medication, and then Pbms win because they receive money from GoodRx by every time their medication is used. So just to summarize, I think GoodRx has tried to take a lot of the insurance component out of it, but doing it in a way of building relationships with several stakeholders in the supply chain that has turned out to be a major innovation and has turned out to be very successful for patients.
Thanks. And thanks again for your talk. I'm glad that I know you can't see your family in person, but that's fun that they could join and see you. I'm sure they're very proud. So thanks again for your great talk.
Thank you, Dr. McElroy.
We have a few questions that were submitted to me. So you discussed options to try to fix pricing by discussing transparency, economic changes, and political changes. These impact pharmacies, Pbms, insurance companies, and distributors. Are there no fixes that can be provided by patients and providers?
There are some, but it's not sufficient because of a lot of the factors that we have discussed. Because as a provider, when we prescribe a medication at the point of prescription, we have no idea what the cost is going to be to the patient. It's not like very many other markets. You know, if I were to want to buy a sink, I could, go and compare prices, and the price is very clear. But the prescriber at the point of prescription doesn't know what the price is, and the patient at the point of care doesn't know how much it's going to cost them. And so that's what makes the challenge of any intervention, for a main intervention from the patients and providers. There are some things that we can do, prescribing generics when we are able to, and trying to be cost conscious. So for example, right now, earlier I talked about the same class substitution, like instead of prescribing clobetasol ointment or betamethasone ointment, the idea behind prescribing a class 1 ointment, that is still not able to be implemented for a variety of regulations and restrictions. So there are things that we do at Grady, or actually at Emory too, where we prescribe multiple prescriptions, in this case, maybe clobetasol and betamethasone, and then tell the patient, okay, just pick up one, whatever, ask the pharmacy which one is cheaper and just choose one of them. And so that is obviously fraught with the patient not understanding, getting both, and misusing the medications. But yes, so to summarize, there are some mechanisms that providers and patients can do, but in my opinion, I think the data shows that it's not sufficient.
Could I say a word?
Yes,
I think your talk was very good, if not excellent. I learned a lot. Some already knew. But let me make a suggestion to make it more effective. And is there some way you can use a pointer when you're doing your discussion? Because that was hard for me to kind of keep up. Secondly, I agree with Dr. Swirlick. It reminds me in his point about dealing directly with where you purchase your drugs, because when I first went into practice, we toyed with the idea, we favored the idea of dealing directly with the patient and not through insurance companies. That way you made the patient aware of what it cost, and that's the way you get price. That's the way you get costs down. And thirdly, I wondered why you didn't mention Publix, because drugstores where you can get your medication, that's where I get most of my medication. Is there some particular reason you didn't, or is there a reason to do that rather than going to the other suppliers?
Sorry, Dr. Fine, you said plum leaks? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Could you repeat that last question?
Publix.
Oh, Publix, like
For getting your prescriptions. That's where I get most of my prescriptions, unless it's real expensive. Is there some reason you didn't mention it?
Well, thank you for that feedback. I do need to work on using more of the pointer, and so that's something I'll focus on moving forward. And then regarding Publix, if you're referring to the pharmacy, Publix,
Yeah.
that's one of the many pharmacies that dispense medications, and they are sometimes cheaper and there are other times not. Pharmacies take different approaches to how they price their cash retail price. For example, Costco is notable because they take whatever price they pay to acquire the medication, they take a fixed percentage and bump it up add that to every medication across the board. Sometimes it's cheaper and sometimes it's not. I'm not sure what Publix's strategy specifically is that's kind of usually classified information on how with their strategy to pricing drugs, but it's certainly one of the many pharmacies that are available, and I think in some circumstances it provides cheap drugs, and other times it's probably on the more expensive side. And that's where we're going back to Dr. McElfresh's question. Sometimes that's where GoodRx is helpful, but GoodRx again is without insurance. And so when you kind of take in the factor of insurance, that adds an extra element of having to kind of compare those prices.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fine.
So Harrison, I just want to point out one other perverse incentive that sort of mixed in all this, and that's Medicare Part D. With a movement, for example, to more cash-based purchase drugs that for example, Amazon's moving toward, those of us who are over 65 who have the option to purchase Medicare Part D, if you elect not to do so at a given point of time, you are penalized if you go back in and decide to purchase it later. So there is this huge incentive from the federal government saying that you have a couple of different options: purchase Part D and use it to buy your drugs, purchase Part D and use cash to buy your drugs, or not purchase Part D and use cash to buy your drugs. And if you take the latter and then change your mind, you're penalized, which to me is just very perverse.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Swirlick. Medicare Part D is a beast in and of itself. When it was first introduced, I think in the early 2000s, there was talk about how to structure. Is it going to be like Medicare Part B, where the Medicare kind of oversees, the government oversees and operates the entire program? It was ultimately decided that it was going to be operated by private payers to essentially in a marketplace. And I think that was in large part due to lobbying by the insurance companies and secondarily the pharmaceutical companies. And it has maintained the free market aspect of Medicare. However, it has created some perverse incentives. I think anytime there's a free market component in healthcare, it has the risk of being taken advantage of.
I'd like to make another point.
There's one more comment in the discussion. But why are PBMs permitted to dip their feet in both pools? Why don't insurance companies demand exclusivity? Don't they lose money because of GoodRx?
Yeah, so the PBMs actually work very closely with GoodRx, and from the PBM side, they receive money for every time a GoodRx coupon is presented. They get paid by that, and from their standpoint, it doesn't really hurt them when a GoodRx coupon is presented. It really, they are going to get their rebates from the drug manufacturer. They're getting paid by the insurer. And so it's almost just an extra revenue stream. With the, why do, something that I thought was interesting, why do pharmacies work with they seem to be potentially losing money, and that actually draws back to they believe that they lose money from patients not picking up the prescriptions due to non-adherence, and GoodRx actually in the long run is more financially incentivizing. And then insurance companies are a win in this because if they don't have to pay for the medication, then they're happy to not have to fork over some extra money. And so GoodRx has done a very commendable job of unifying and aligning incentives among a complex stakeholder system to be able to create an intervention that is a win-win-win for a lot of people.
All right. Anybody else have any other questions for Dr. Nguyen?
Zach, I've always thought that history is important, even in dermatology, or especially in dermatology. And you may not know this, but in the beginning, we, members of the DeKalb Medical Society, fought Medicare. We were just like 150% against it. One reason was just sort of, well, there are a lot of reasons, but Medicare was, you never knew what you'd get reimbursed. And then the tables turned, and Medicare became the most reliable payer, because if you file a certain number, you got paid for what they said they would pay you. And many of the insurance companies became totally unreliable. I'm not going to mention names, but I just think it's interesting how physicians, particularly conservative groups like the DeKalb Medical Society, really opposed Medicare. It was the worst thing that could happen. And now it's turned out to be really, for those over 65, I think I'm in a little higher group than that, but it's a wonderful thing to have. But thanks again for your really enlightening presentation.
Thank you for that historical component, Dr. Fine. As I was putting this together, I think really understanding the various aspects of this requires going back and looking at the history and why things exist, because I hope to have shown logic and rationale is not usually the case. There's usually some political driver in the past that has resulted in why the mechanisms are the way they are.
Hey, Harrison, I just wanted to throw out one thing in light of what Dr. Fine just said, because I think it's really important. And I think this is one of the things that I tend to get hung up on, is that historically, a lot of times, at least when my grandfather was in the middle of nowhere, Georgia, taking eggs for payment, we didn't have insurance companies except for in situations where we really needed it. And it was limited. And, you kind of said that and I somewhat would give you a little pushback about the patients and the providers not contributing a significant amount to this problem. But I think one of the solutions, oddly enough, might be the patients, in the sense that, we've kind of changed this model from insurance as being a use it in very rare circumstances to using it from cradle to grave. And that is a very different financial model to have this discussion about. So I think, until we either change the patient perspective that healthcare is a right or that it's not, I feel like part of the discussion there, which resolves a lot around finances, until that's kind of clarified, I think we're still going to go around in this loop of trying to figure out, who gets the bigger piece of the pie. Just my thought. Thanks for that, Dr. Blaylock. I think patients are culpable as well. They contribute to part of this issue, and one of the interventions is trying to equip patients with the tools and the transparency to understand how they are contributing to this problem. And so, but I think I completely agree that that patients and providers are contributing to the issue, and that it's just part of the whole pie that we currently see. And so we can try to do our part, but there's other parts that need to be rectified as well.
All right. Well, thank you for a great grand rounds, Dr. Nguyen. Thanks for everybody for participating in the questions. Let me throw up the QR codes for anybody who wasn't able to sign in. And again, thank you for your participation, and hope you have the rest of your day is treating you as well as we did this morning.
Thank you all.